Welcome back to Triple Black. This song, I have learned, is a big marker in the progression of the development of metal and rock music. Well, of course, as with many things, from, say, the invention of peanut butter to the automobile, telephone, flush toilet, the credited inventor or originator is always debatable, and whoever gets credit is not necessarily the first to have formed or created the idea. And so it is with heavy metal. Black Sabbath gets the credit for being the first heavy metal song and band, even though there are several other songs from other bands which could, from some perspective or other, be argued as the first manifestation or progression into heavy metal. I've seen a few of your comments pointing to a different song or two in my announcements video, and I'd love to hear the conversation develop a bit more, and maybe we can really delve into the reasons both for and against the song Black Sabbath being the first. So let me know your opinions and why you hold that opinion in the comments here. But regardless, from what I know, I think I can safely say this band is the first heavy metal band, and this album is the first heavy metal album. Even more specifically, the subgenre of not just heavy metal, but what I've learned is called doom metal. I'm no expert on it, but that's what I've gathered from my research and conversations. So this song does mark the beginning of a new era. And as I am beginning to understand at least a little bit of the various styles and genres falling under the rock umbrella, I can appreciate the significance of this new musical trend, which, from what I can tell, has developed into something so vastly different that some rock fans don't relate to it at all, while others practically live in this metal world. As many of you already know, the guitarist Tony Iommi had the devastating misfortune of losing two of his finger ends in an industrial machine accident. That's a really horrifying thing, especially for a musician, because it has such an impact on one's self, one's identity. I'm thinking, what if I had that misfortune? How would I conceive of myself as a harpist, as a pianist, after something like that? But instead of giving up, Tony created some prosthetic finger ends, which made it possible for him to continue to play the guitar. And that, I think, really says something about his determination and commitment, and his passion for music. So we can all use his example and learn that we should never give up our dream, even when misfortune strikes. And of course, especially those of us who play stringed instruments, what the ends of our fingers are like has a huge impact on our sound. As a harpist, I am familiar with this intimate relationship between fingers and strings. I'm tempted to call it a symbiosis because the condition of one affects the behavior and condition of the other. It goes both ways. And they're constantly interacting and changing through the course of that interaction. If I have calluses, it affects the sound I can produce. And the shape and thickness and suppleness of the calluses all play a part in what kind of sound I can get and how I go about getting it. Well, I'm planning to give you a tour of the harp sometime in the near future, and I'll explain more about it then. But I want to say that Tony Iommi has my full sympathy. And now, with his artificial fingertips, he's stuck with a different sound than before. What's he to do with it? He simply cannot get the kind of sound that he had before the accident because the material interaction is so vastly different. Determination and passion are a great start, but then, if you still don't have what you need to get the expected sound, you're likely to end up fighting a losing battle, always coming in second best behind the more advantaged. But I think the road he chose to take was incredible. He basically abandoned the whole sound world built around the interaction of flesh on string, and took the sound which was now natural to him and made it one of the dominating features of the music they were creating. So, in a way, he turned his disadvantage into an advantage, so that now we can look back and say that was the beginning of a kind of sound world, a musical style, which has impacted and become dear to so many people. Now, I want to ask this question, but I want to be very careful because I certainly don't want to be dismissive or insensitive. The question is this: was it really a tragedy? And my reason for asking is because I feel like it's a real testament to Tony's spirit and attitude that he made it into something amazing. He turned it into a unique musical gift. So let's look at it. The song is musically very simple in its design, but there's a wonderful little detail about where the inspiration came from for this song. Gustav Holst, you may have heard of, he was a British classical composer, and he wrote a famous work called The Planets. It's an orchestral suite written between 1914 and 1916, and it represents all the known planets of the solar system seen from Earth at that time, and their corresponding astrological character, including Jupiter and Mars. The first movement is titled Mars, Bringer of War. And here's a link, and I encourage you to listen to it and see if you can notice what I'm talking about. Now, Geezer, the bass guitarist of Black Sabbath, tells the story of how he was a mid-level fan of Holst's planets. And one day while the band was rehearsing, he was playing around with one of the motifs of the Mars movement on his guitar. And it sounds like this. And if you listen to the link, you'll hear it starting at the beginning, and it features multiple times throughout the entire movement. Well, the next day, they came back to rehearse some more, and now Tony Iommi started it on his guitar. But whether intentionally or not, maybe by accident, I didn't find any details. Perhaps he wasn't remembering it precisely, or perhaps he just took it intentionally as inspiration for something else. Instead of sounding like this, it came out like this. And that was the birth of the song. Please do check out the link and compare the two works. I'd love to hear what you think about it, and drop a comment for me to read. Oh, and it was the same Geezer Butler, bass guitarist, who inspired the lyrics of this song. He tells the story of moving into this new flat, which he had painted black with inverted crosses everywhere. And the vocalist of the band, Ozzy Osbourne, had given him this 16th century book about black magic, which he placed in the airing cupboard. Well, later that night, he woke up and saw this black shadow at the end of his bed. And he was so frightened, the first thing he did, he ran to the airing cupboard to throw out the book. But guess what? The book had disappeared. Whether true or untrue, it's quite a story. Now let's dig into the musical design of the piece and content. The melody is slow. I feel like it's a bit dirge-like, paced to give a feeling of tension and this portending doom. And the drums are quite simple, I think. Not really heavily applied. It's relying more on strategic placement of those percussive elements. Now, the tritone motif. I mentioned it in the first listen, and I just demonstrated it here. I like to call it a double tritone because it's a tritone from here to here, and it's also a tritone from here. So we hear this octave, tritone down, and tritone down to repeat. Now, I do want to mention there's a lot of myth built up around this tritone concept, the devil's interval, the devil in music, however you want to call it. One of the myths is that it was somehow illegal or forbidden, or you were in danger of your life, or excommunication from the church back in medieval times, if you were to sing or play or create a piece of music with the tritone in it. That's actually not true. In fact, they didn't even have the term the devil in music back in that time. That came later. The reason for it being undesirable and avoided, and basically you don't find it in the church music of the time, is because it didn't fit with their concept of music being a representation of the order of the universe and the harmony between earth and heaven and so forth. They had all these elaborate ideas about music being something that manifests truths or elements in the spiritual and in the natural world. So it wasn't used, but that doesn't mean that you'd be beheaded if you did try to use it. You just didn't want to try to use it. It was something that was undesirable. Why would you do it if it would throw off the balance of your music? You wanted a good piece of music, something that was well composed. Anyway, so just a little myth busting there. And if you want, I'm not going to go more into the tritone here because I've already talked about it once in my video on At the Graves by King Diamond, and you can check out that link up here too. So then, almost 3/4 of the way through, we get to the running section, which is again built on a simple motif. Suddenly it speeds up and we go from this slow, doom-like tempo to this and those notes are also starting on the same note. Something like that. And that motif is what features next. Now, the tritone doesn't really come out here. It's more built in here, but we hear the minor sixth, but we don't hear this tritone. So the tritone has kind of vanished in that moment. Instead, we're running. And so on. Then, later, after we've been running and running for a bit, it shifts to just the first two pitches. And so on. And eventually it settles on just the tonic. And then, when the vocal line ends, this bass is reinforced and begins a stepping down pattern, which, because we've been solidly anchored in this tonic minor chord with all this running business happening, we sort of expect to hear it walking down the scale, a bit like this. And that's exactly what it starts to do. And this sounds dark enough, but then a simple little twist, instead of going to here, we go to here. And then we end up here. And even though this is quite, from here to here, is quite a harmonious sound, the way it comes into the music is very uncomfortable and edgy. And so it's interesting how he starts with this famously uncomfortable sound, and then he takes this famously comfortable sound and makes even that sound uncomfortable, unnatural, on edge. Anyway, so this descending pattern, sort of scale-like, settles into a kind of foundation on which the guitar solo rides, and the guitar is doing all its stuff, but this bass is very strong. And then finally at the end, again, a simple little repetition device is used, where it switches to only the first two notes of that descent. And you hear it doing this a few times. And then finally, at the very end, the last thing we hear is this quick descending minor chord in arpeggio style. And that's how the song ends. What makes this song so compelling? Because everything I've been showing you about the structure and the material of the piece has either been built around this minor chord, G minor chord, or the tritone built on G. Well, it's the combination of simplicity of design, effective pacing, and relentless repetition. To add more complexity, I think would distract from the core, from the heart of it. It would weaken its impact. One of the instinctive senses of a composer, or any artist for that matter, is knowing when to stop, when not to add more, when not to fluff it up. Even performers of other artists' creations have to make this kind of judgment. How much of oneself should be put into it, and how much should we keep ourselves out of it in order to not get in the way of the music? With composing, it's an even greater challenge, because the creation flowing out of oneself is oneself. So how can it be a problem to add more of it? I would compare it to writing a story or an essay. You know the old adage, cut out all unnecessary words. And removing the superfluous so that the message is communicated with the greatest efficiency is very important to a well-constructed final product. Shoot the arrow straight. So it is with the music. And this song, I think, is a great example of that kind of straight-shooting compositional style. Do I like it? Well, again, it's one of those songs which I can't say I choose to listen to for enjoyment's sake. It's just not my style preference at this point in my life. I guess if I'm going to listen to something rather ominous, I prefer Holst's orchestral sound better. But I do appreciate the craftsmanship of it, as well as the significance of this song and this album and this band in the course of music history. Well, that's it for today. But before I go, let me remind you about the poll, which is still in the community tab. Go there and vote for your favorite band, because this coming Saturday, we will meet live and I will announce the winning band and song, which I will review the winning song next month. Also remember, if you want early access to the first listen, all you have to do is visit my Ko-fi page, make a donation of your choice, and that gives you early access to all my first listen and reaction videos. If you want to receive notifications when I post new content, you can activate it by clicking the little bell next to the subscribe button, and click this link to watch the first half of this experience where I hear this song for the first time. I'll see you soon.